The aim of this work is to analyze some aspects of literary translation and the numerous problems related to it, with examples of specific types of translation, such as drama translation. The work aims at studying in detail some literary works, first of all, those of Nobel Prize Samuel Beckett. Starting from a general analysis of bilingualism, the work will focus on Beckett's bilingualism and the influence it had on the author's career and legacy. Afterwards, in the analysis of issues related to self-translation, I will give account of Beckett's approach to the translation of his own works. Thanks to this research work, I had the possibility to enhance my knowledge of literary translation. The term translation nowadays is of everyday use. It is generally defined as the process of translating words or texts from one language into another, often without taking into consideration the social and cultural context, which are part of the translator background and culture. Clearly, this definition has its limits, because it tries to define this process as universal and independent from external factors such as social and cultural ones, and without considering other types of influences on the translator's work. The main question is about the meaning of the term faithfulness in the translation field, but there are many discordant answers. The translation process has to take into consideration both linguistic and cultural exchange. The aim of translation is to create an equivalent text of the original version in another language, so that the translated text becomes a corresponding version of the original version, but in a culture that is different in place and time. The translation for a script for the stage is a particular example of translation, because this text is always influenced by the performance requirements. This type of translation is considered to be very difficult. Actually, it is very difficult to translate dialogues and to adapt them into lines. The stereotype of a translator as imposter is common. Despite the critics against this branch of knowledge, that certainly has its limits, it is indispensable. Self-translation is a translation of a source text into a target text by the writer of a source text. It defines the process of translation in which the author is the translator of a text as well. Samuel Beckett was an Irish novelist, playwright, theatre director, poet, and literary translator. He was a bilingual writer. In fact, he wrote both in English and French. He had the capability of assimilating all secrets of a language. This competence is particularly evident during his years of study. Actually, at university, he studied French, Italian, and English, but he could also speak German. According to many researchers, there will be considerable advantages in being bilingual. Actually, it seems that bilingualism promotes metalinguistic knowledge, and it is likely also other cognitive aspects benefit from it. Samuel Beckett's bilingualism has been subject of study for years, because it is one of his work's main characteristics. Beckett was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1969. He started writing his early works in English, then he switched to French and again to English. This switch between English and French led to an important transformation in his style. Beckett used to review his works while he was translating them into another language. For this reason, there are many versions of his works. His translations represent new and parallel texts. All these reasons make the translation of his works into other languages very difficult. The translator must ask himself which version of Beckett's works should he translate. Do original version and the self-translation have the same prestige? It's clear that there are a lot of evidences of his linguistic switch, especially in letters. Actually, in his letters, Beckett used to switch from English to French also in a single conversation, sometimes even in a single sentence. These examples show the growing influence of French in Beckett's life. Recent studies show that bilingual people suffer from the tip of the tongue phenomenon more than monolingual people. This is the phenomenon of failing to retrieve a word from memory. The phenomenon's name comes from the saying, "It's on the tip of my tongue." All these aspects are really important to understand Beckett's style. In order to self-translate his works, Beckett was constantly switching between the two languages. As a consequence, he was always looking for the most appropriate word to use, and this was really frustrating. Since the self-translation is considered a particular kind of translation, also the self-translator has to be considered as a different kind of translator. The self-translator usually changes not only the expressions, but also the meaning of a text. It is necessary to distinguish among the works that were born to be translated in either language from those that have been translated many years after the original version. In the first case, when the author translated the work immediately after having wrote it, there is a great similarity between the two texts. But in the second case, when he translated the text many years later, the two versions appear to be very different. At that time, this switch was considered as something negative, but now, after many studies carried out on bilingualism, researchers agree that only people having great fluency in two or more languages are able to shift among them so rapidly. It is clear that Beckett was one of those people. This characteristic has led him to live a particular relationship with language and writing, and that has contributed to make his work unique and interesting.